Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. It really means a lot to me. This morning, so I just left the store, bought some dry ice, going to the site right now. But this morning, myself, my sub-I business partner, Jaime Baez, and my lead CRC, Katie Welch, shout out to them. We all woke up early. We got up at 5 a.m. our time to be on a 6 a.m. call with a sponsor discussing things that are pertinent to sponsors, that sponsors want to hear from sites. And by the way, this is what we're trying to facilitate at Save Our Sites conference. And I told the sponsor that we spoke in front of, there was about 100 people, maybe a little under 100 people, all from one company. Hey, if you want to hear what sites have to say, continue doing this. These one-on-ones are good. It gives us a chance to showcase our site to you guys, but we have an entire conference built around this. So this is probably going to be a panel discussion, but there was two things that they asked that I thought were interesting. The first one, they asked a lot of interesting things, but the two in particular I want to make this video on. The first one was, with all this consolidation happening now with site networks and private equity entering clinical research and venture capital and huge site networks, right? I was just at a investigator meeting about 9 months ago. I don't go to too many, but I did go to this one because I wanted to go to Dallas. And half of the sites, I kid you not, half of the sites were large site networks. And from those large site networks, like the same 3 site networks, basically. This sponsor, it was interesting to me. This sponsor asked, how does that activity impact small sites like mine? And it's a very interesting question considering who's asking. I told them I'm neutral. The jury is still out on how this is going to turn out. I'm old enough to remember the SMO bubble, Site Management Organization, and what happened there. Cliff Notes version is that bubble popped because of a lack of quality control systems. There was way too much expansion and not enough focus on quality control. And sponsors got burned, physicians got burned, probably a whole bunch of other stakeholders too, patients, employees as well. This time around, we're not noticing quality. I think quality's, so far, looks like it's going to be fine. It might actually even improve. As much as I don't like larger companies and consolidation, I'm a very underdog kind of personality. I thrive in the small business environments. And when it gets big enough to have a management layer, I like to move on. I think this time around, there's way too much money invested to cut corners on quality. I'm talking to a couple of smaller groups about options, exploring options for my own site, Yuma Clinical Trials. So I'm not against this idea, but I think that there is an element of being independent, being small, where on the surface you might have advantages of joining up with a larger site network. A lot of sites are doing this out of necessity. They feel they're getting competed out. I don't see that as being the case here where I'm at. I think we are in a very unique market. I think there are a lot of markets like this in the United States. There's probably 100 or so markets like Yuma that are not household names, that are not nationally known cities, but they're big. They're 100,000 people or more. They have ecosystems and there's no research. And a lot of them are underserved with a lot of minorities, a lot of diversity, but not all of them. I think we lose something when we join forces. There's a certain artisanal component where, and somebody in the comments on this webinar I was on from the sponsor, because I use the analogy of a family-owned restaurant. You know, I like to make things simple by highlighting things we could all relate to. So restaurants, I love going to restaurants. I'm a foodie. My wife's a foodie. We like going to eat. There's a clear difference between a family-owned business and one that is a chain, or there's a huge discrepancy in difference between like a small mom and pop seafood place that's only in Yuma versus Red Lobster, right? But there's subtler evolutions of this restaurant. There's that small mom and pop that started out as a taco shop. Then they get a little bigger and have multiple locations. Then they try to expand outside of their city, and then it just doesn't taste the same. There is certain goodwill. I'm a big believer of businesses generating goodwill just for the sake of respecting the community. Not necessarily for ROI, return on investment. Just for the sake of respecting the community that we are in. I think that is capitalism at its purest form. I think there's a lot of things wrong with capitalism. I think we're seeing a lot of that with the wealth gap, and those are things for other podcasts to discuss. But capitalism in its purest form, I think, is community-based entrepreneurs that live in the community. I think that's the key. And that need the ecosystem to survive. And there is a sort of a social peer pressure. Like, you can't just destroy a community and not care because you don't live there and just extract profits from it. And matter of fact, that's what we're seeing in my very city that I'm in right now, Yuma, Arizona. There is a large hospital system here that's been here for like 40 years, 50 years maybe. It used to be great. It used to be family run. The family got, very successful. They sold it. I think it was sold a couple of times. Now it's part of some private equity group that has a string of hospitals, and they don't live here, and they don't care about the community. They act like they care, but they don't care about the community. And everything's profits and everything's ROI, and if you're 1 minute late to your appointment, you can't come back, you got to reschedule, and all these things that you lose the human touch. Right? Yesterday, my wife and I had a doctor's appointment. My wife went. We were 5 minutes late. They said, you can't come. You can't. Like, we're done. And it's not like the clinic was busy. They have this policy, and it's not even the person's fault who was the employee there. She said, and I know it's ridiculous, but the system, I'm locked. The system won't let me get you in. It's our policy. These kind of things are what happen when small companies become not just bigger, because I think there's big companies that do well and have a lot of goodwill, but when the stakeholders, the original stakeholders or the ownership group does not depend on the community, they don't live in the community, they don't rely on the community, they're big enough to where if you need to staff your business, you can pay people to move. They don't have to use the services themselves. There's no social peer pressure, and there's no reason for goodwill other than a virtue signal. And I think that's not a good thing. So that's one of the superpowers, I think, of the smaller clinics. And there's plenty of small sites, trust me, I know, that don't have any goodwill either. So you can argue, well, how good is this? Like, what kind of advantage is that really? And in some communities, it makes all the difference in the world. In a place like mine, where I live right now, the majority of the community is fed up with the hospital system. There's just no other options. Slowly, there are other entrants creeping in. So, over time, I think the monopoly status of this hospital is going to decrease. But, back to clinical research, I think there are certain markets where the site networks have completely taken over. Like some of the larger markets, in some of the more standard therapeutic areas or indications, like your standard hypertension, obesity, diabetes, with no difficult inclusion-exclusion criteria, those are getting gobbled up by the big site networks. To the point where even in Yuma, where I'm at, we've done really good work on a couple of studies for some big sponsors that have promised us more work, and they have given us more work, but they haven't given us these quote-unquote easier studies. And in a way, I feel like the small sites should be rewarded, and I feel like that's a little bit of what we miss out on when we don't join a larger site network, because they're doing full-time biz dev. They're going to every single conference. They're whining and dining all these big pharma. And so the easier studies go to the big money, big pockets, private equity. And then even if you're a good site, but you're not part of one of these groups, you're getting the tougher studies. That's just the way it is. That's something I did not actually mention on the webinar, which I wish I did. I focused more on the community outreach aspect, which is a perfect segue into the next question they asked. How has social media helped your site in building your company's brand? It's helped tremendously. One of the disadvantages, I talked about a lot of the advantages of being in a small town. There's no competition, even though indirectly we are competing with the big site networks because we're not getting those easy studies necessarily all the time. The patients here, because there has never been research, they're inherently skeptical about research. So sites in smaller communities where there are no research options other than one player, they are the clinical research ambassadors to that community. And it's our job to educate the public, but it's also our job to gain the trust of the public. And the reason we've done these social media brandings, we'll go out and we'll interview. We hired a videographer to do this regularly. Every month we go out, we interview local business owners, community staples. One of our most popular episodes was a nail salon owner. I wasn't even in it. Two of our coordinators got their nails done, and they just had a recorded conversation with the nail salon owner as she was doing their nails. For us, that went viral. That video has helped us gain trust in the community, as crazy as that sounds. Because one of the first things patients ask us when they see one of our ads or they learn about our studies is this a scam? And no matter how much you talk, you're not going to convince someone who thinks this might be a scam. So instead, what we say is, no, of course not, but check out our social media profile, check out our Instagram, check out our YouTube, check out our TikTok channel. You know, in addition to interviewing business owners that you probably know, that's one of the advantages of being in a small town, is that nail salon owner is popular. So if people associate her with us and they trust her and she's in an hour-long video with us, then we must not be that bad, right? We can't be that bad because we all know Jenny, and Jenny wouldn't associate with con artists. And that's how you build trust. And that's what I fear, relating back to the first post. The site networks are going to lose because there's no immediate ROI on this expenditure, right? Expenditure. There's no immediate ROI. Like, how do you measure a patient that doesn't come in to screen necessarily, but is no longer fearful of your site? Like, okay, they're not con artists, but I'm still not going to do a study right now, but maybe later I'll do a study. How do you put an ROI on that? You really can't, at least in not the way private equity analyzes return on investment. So that's one of the things that I think I could spend an hour on, and that's one of the things where I think, like, we've done social media out of necessity, and I fear that as sites start joining site networks, that some of these intangibles get lost. And I really enjoy the human aspects and the genuine goodwill of small businesses, especially in their communities. We're losing a lot of that regardless of site networks because of the nature of online businesses. The way our economy is shaping out to be and the way technology is allowing is you can have a business, you can run it from anywhere, you can run it from the moon if you wanted to live there and you had a Wi-Fi signal. But we're losing touch with the community. And I think, for these last few brick and mortar businesses, and research sites are definitely brick and mortar businesses, despite people trying to change that with things like DCT, decentralized clinical trials, which I don't think are going to work necessarily, or maybe there'll be elements of it that works. I fear that we will lose this with more consolidation. Hopefully not. Let's talk more about all this stuff at Save Our Sites. I hope I'm not too idealistic here. Again, I think a lot like the social media stuff, it's not idealistic at all. It's actually a necessity. Measure the return on investment until you see it's working. I think, to me, that's binary. It's either working or it's not. And there's no incremental improvements. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Catch you all later. Bye-bye.